Welcome to the From Foster to Blank podcast, where we're highlighting former foster youth who have discovered their passion in life and creating their own purpose by redefining what success means to them. It's almost like a Where Are They Now podcast. Within every single story, we will see different people highlight what inspired them to change the direction of their life and how they achieve their own goals by redefining what success is. The best part is everyone is going to have a different definition of what success is, and we get to learn from them. The other neat part is that every single one of these people are going to highlight what they do, and they're going to give advice on how they got there. This is an educational podcast for people that are like you and me, foster care kids, but we're going to see it from a different lens of positivity. So here we go. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the From Foster to Blank podcast. I almost said concept, but it's the same thing. But I have Tina here with me, and we're going to jump in, and she is going to tell us what she does, and then we're just going to go and ask questions. So what do you do?
I was actually just preparing for this and I was like, what do I do? So I am a former teacher. I went to college to be a teacher and I taught for 2 years in the public school system in Texas. And I was a EC through 6 generalist English as a second language teacher. I taught third graders, which I absolutely loved. And then now I'm home with my son and I work from home. I'm a social media manager, which is like my day job, I say. And then I don't know if I call what I do on Instagram a job. I'm gonna guess it is. I say I share my story in many different ways. I share it on my Instagram. I share it on podcasts like this. I share it in training, and then in my little business I just started. I share my story in ways to help people.
Okay, so you just started your business. What do you do with your business?
Yeah, so in my business, I started a small consulting business. It's just me. I'm supporting foster and adoptive parents or prospective foster and adoptive parents. So people who are interested. And I'm actually working on expanding it a little bit to teachers. So just supporting teachers in the classroom.
I love that. And so when you come in and you consult with them, what does that look like?
So I do it 100% virtual at the moment because most of the people that I meet with are not where I live. They're complete strangers, which was weird at first, but now it's like it's cool. But what it looks like is they go on my website, they book a session, and usually in the notes they give me like a really small summary of like what they want to talk about or what they're needing support or advice on. And if they don't, then I usually reach out to them and I ask questions like, what do you want to talk about, or like what are your goals, or what are you hoping to leave the session with, things like that. And I'm still refining that process a little bit, just to make it a little bit more efficient, but that's kind of how it goes. And then I just try to prepare based on what they said, just to come up with some advice or resources. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like, just back and forth conversation. I try to just ask a lot of questions and let them share a lot.
And so they're just like wanting to learn about how to better support foster youth in whatever area that might be, teaching, if it's as a parent or someone coming alongside of a parent, and then you're coaching them through that. I love that. That's so unique. And it is kind of like when you first start off, I coach for doctoral students, but I also coach businesses and organizations who are working with foster youth. So it's a little bit different because it's not individual parents or teachers, but it's more of like the support programs at colleges and stuff. And it is weird when you start at first, you're like, oh, you're a stranger, but I don't know, it's really neat to get to see who you get to meet through what we do. But I love that because it's so unique to like, it's individual. And I think that as someone who went through guardianship of my siblings, like sometimes you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And like knowing that there's someone like you out there, I'm like, oh, that would have been so great to know, like like ask the questions and not feel like the receiving answer is going to be not helpful, but also at the same time feel like it's going to be really informative. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have, oh, so I thought you were saying, did you have something else you wanted to add?
No.
Okay.
No.
I was like, I didn't want to move too fast. Okay, so the second question is, how do you define success?
That's such a good question. I was thinking about this and I was trying to just like start from the fact that people often tell me, "Oh, you're so successful." And I'd love to start asking them, "What do you mean?"
Do
Because I think
it.
everybody has a very different definition.
Mhm.
Um, but I think for me, it really parallels what my therapist said to me, which is that normal is whatever is healthy for you.
Mm.
Because I was really struggling with being, I don't know if like envious is the right word, of my sisters because, excuse me, their lives look very typical. You know, grew up with their parents. They, I don't know, like their lives look normal. And I was like, I want that. Like, I want a normal life, but I'm never gonna have that in in terms of their normal because well, you can't get rid of being adopted and you can't get rid of being having been in foster care. Um, but I think it's been so powerful for me keeping in mind that normal is what's healthy for me and that may look different in different seasons. And I think success kind of parallels that very closely. You know, success does not always and hasn't always equal happiness for me. I may achieve my goal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm happy about it because sometimes we have to do things that we don't want to do. But
Yeah,
it doesn't mean like we still complete them. We still, you know, carry through what we set out to do. But that doesn't mean that we're always happy. And I think too, like for me, I've seen, especially like in my career, like my goals have changed as I along the way.
Mhm.
And I think that's okay, you know. And that's I think that's been something that I've had to be gracious with myself about, but that's hard because I'm an Enneagram 1, a type A person. I want everything to be just so, which is so ironic because my life has not been just so.
Right.
Um, so it's like, where did that come from? Um, but all that to say, um, you know, I think understanding that, you know, my goals may change and that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. It
Mm.
just means that I'm human, you know? I can't see the end, and so if it changes along the way, that's okay.
I love that. I'm writing notes because I'm a note taker. So one of the things that I love that you said is health. It's success is defined as what's healthy for you. And I don't think a lot of us look at that when we look at what success means. And one of the things that I personally know is that success is defined differently by everybody, but also what's healthy for us is different per person. And like
Mhm.
you said, like, I don't feel like my life can ever be that kind of normal that I desire it to be. And I think like I have felt that so many times where it's just like, man, like it's not like I don't know if it's a bad envious, but like I do see that with friends where I'm like, man, you have your parents, you have your siblings all together. Like there's no issues. Like you guys never had to go through the stuff that we went through with foster care. But it's also I have to come to the understanding that like this is where I am at, and that's okay to desire that too, which makes it where I want to have that for my daughter, and I'm like, you know what? I didn't get
Right.
that, but I'm gonna make sure she does and not like live through her childhood. Because I know some people will do that where they're like, I'm gonna live through and give
Mhm.
my child the childhood I never got. And I'm just like, I just want her to grow up and be like, I had a normal childhood where it's like I have my parents, I have my siblings, I have my friends, I have structure and discipline. But that's so different for all of us. And that desire I think is normal. And that's not I
Mhm.
always used to feel like it was a bad thing to want that until like because I was afraid of like being jealous. And I'm like, no, as a foster care kid,
Mhm.
you can want that normalcy. You could want and desire
Mhm.
that, but we can't just be like, well, I'm not going to live life because I didn't get that. Like it's kind
Right.
of that weird realization. But also with
Mhm.
the on the line of success, you said success doesn't mean happiness. Sometimes it's just that we are disciplined and we have to keep going. And I think that this is where
Yeah.
our danger comes in for anyone who's like, it doesn't always, just because we made it doesn't mean we're content with where we're at, but also like it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we're actually happy with that result where we got, and we still want to have something
Right.
else. That's okay too. And there was a friend
Right.
who told me once when I was, I think like 19 or 20, and he's like, it's okay to be content with what you have and want more. What you don't want to do is always be like, well, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. And never find the contentment in the present that you're in. And I think that's super powerful, because if we don't look at like, I'm happy with the fact that I'm doing what I need to do. Like, I'm happy with the choices I've made to get where I'm going, but I don't want to stop here, because if I stop here, like,
Yeah.
that's really where I want to end. And I think that like understanding that happiness does not come with success. It's what we make it when we emotionally work through that. And it's okay
Yeah.
to step and change that goal to say, you know what, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And like, I love that you said that, like, goals can be changed, but it doesn't mean that we failed. And I think sometimes we're like,
Yeah.
oh, if, you know, I know you said you were in teaching. I used to be in education on the admissions side, thought that was my like ultimate dream job. And it changed. I lost that job during COVID. And so it was one of those things that
Yeah.
I'm like, well, now I feel like I'm a failure. And it's like, hold on, no, the goal can change. Your life could look different than what you thought it was going to be. And it's almost always better. Almost always better. When we're like, we just kind of let that go and say, you know what, that was then, this is now. But I can let that change. And it doesn't mean that I failed in any way at all. Like, I can change my job 100 times. Like, that's, but I think sometimes we get stuck on that. Like, well, it doesn't look like the way that I planned it. And that's dangerous, a dangerous game to play, because we'll just never be content with what we have or where we're at, and realize like, we're not stopping here. We're not saying that you have to find contentment and stop where you're at, but it's knowing that you can change. I love that. And then you
Yeah.
brought up the Enneagram. So can you talk about what the Enneagram is?
I don't know a ton about the Enneagram. I've read a book about it. And don't ask me what book it was, because I don't remember.
Yeah. There's a few out there, so I'm like,
There's so many. Yeah. So basically the Enneagram, there's like what, 8 types, I think, or 9 types?
There's 9 types.
9 types. And so since I am a type 1 and my husband is also a type 1, it's like very like organized, structured, simple, quiet, I think. I don't honestly remember what else, but that's very much how I am, and I think how I've always been. So yeah, I'm afraid I don't know a ton about it.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No, you're good. So for like, I Googled it, so I'm just gonna let you know, because I don't know how to describe it. So it's a personality test.
Okay.
So I literally have it on my screen. So I'm not just like, oh, I know what it is. Like, I literally had to Google it because I forgot what
Okay.
but it's a personality test. It
There you
actually,
go.
they have 16 personality types. But what it is there's the 9 core, and then you could be like a wing of
Okay.
something. I'm a type 1, but I'm also tied for 6 and 9, and they were like right here with them, which is weird because people are like, that never happens. Like, I talked to the organization and they're like, that's rare. That a lot of that has to do with how you were raised, and like, you want structure, you want you don't want to be the fighter. Like, you want to be someone who's like, let's just have peace, because you're most likely exhausted from arguments. But I really like personality tests because I feel like it helps us understand ourselves a lot better. There's another one that I did was Strengths Finders 2.0, and that really helped me learn how I learn and retain information. But I love learning more about myself in like my internal thought process and how I think and why I am who I am. And if anyone wants to take it, you totally can. You can literally Google Enneagram and like personality tests and stuff like that. And I think it does help us to understand who we are and how to work with ourselves and communicate with other people.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
you,
that's when I took it. When I started my job, they had us to like the Enneagram test, and then they had us read this book. And then so we like we it's funny when when we're working with other people, I'll be like, "Are they a 3?" Like, I mean, it really does help. It helps you understand how to communicate with people and why people may be doing what they're doing,
Yes. Well, and that I
and
think that's
that's
the
so
funny part
helpful.
is that, it kind of starts off where it's like usually the leader wants to know who's on their team and how to work best with them. But if they're able to also teach you how to work with other people, you just become a better
Mhm.
team. And it's not to like this isn't to psychoanalyze anybody, but it really is to say like how can I communicate the best to you as a one.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not a structure person. So, a structure person, we want to start on time, we want to end on time, but also too, like, can you tell me what's expected of me in this so I know if I can commit or not?
mhm,
And, people
right,
text me and they're like, hey, do you have a minute? I'm like, that's anxiety ridden. Why would you do that to me? Like, tell me why you want to have a call. And that's just the
right,
one and then a little bit of the nine in me. But it is definitely helpful when you understand who you're talking to understand who they are
mhm,
at their core so that you can better communicate with them. So I am like,
mhm,
I love the Enneagram, but I know some people overuse it where they're like, oh, this is just me, and
yeah,
they don't use it for good. So it's the same thing with like,
right,
zodiac signs and enneagrams and all this other stuff. Like I
right,
always hear people say like, "Oh, I'm just this," and it's more of an excuse versus something like, "Hey, I
right,
would prefer if you could communicate to me like this because this is what tends to happen when you do it this way, and I want to know how to
yeah,
communicate with you." And I
mhm,
think it. I just love the
yeah,
enneagram when it's used properly.
yeah, yeah. I found it really powerful for me because I think of someone who was in foster care and, really just had a lot of like developmental and emotional setbacks.
Mm,
It's been really hard for me to like figure out who I am. And I
mm,
think having those like that little bit of like ideas or structure, just things to think about. Like, do I do this? Do I do that? You
yeah,
know, I think that really helped me like, okay, who am I? Like, I don't know, because I think that's so hard for kids who've been in foster care because I think the experience can become your identity and it's not all of your identity, but it's really hard to not make it all your identity.
absolutely.
All like
I think that you just hit it nail like on the head. Like this is why I love personality tests so much is because we had lost our identity for so long. And people still to this day like tell me to stay in my lane. They're like, "You're foster care, stay in your lane." And they're just like stay on that. But we're so much more than foster care and our experience. We're not the foster care system. We went through the foster care system and that identity when we get lost in that um, that's not for our benefit. Like, yeah, we could be advocates, but we're so much more than that, and we are
yeah.
so much more than that. But
Mhm.
I agree. Like the personality test, I'm like, oh, that's why I love them so much, is because it helped me
Yeah.
understand who I am and how
Mhm.
to like even the things that I didn't like about myself. I understood it and was able to kind of work through
Yeah.
differently because of these personality tests to say like one of the things the Enneagram helped with and the Strengths Finders 2.0, I took them like back to back for the job I was at. And the Strengths Finder kind of tells you how you work in different pressures, like learning and in work.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I found is I always used to get really frustrated with myself because I would get really overwhelmed when I had too much information. So me sitting in an 8-hour straight lecture, I didn't understand why I always left crying and really upset over like there wasn't anything to be upset about. And I found that one of my top things is learner. And with someone who's a learner, when they have too much information coming in at once, it takes a few days to process it. So math and me are not friends because typically it's like, here's all this information, go process it, and then do a quiz on Wednesday. And my brain would never retain
Yeah.
it. But then three to four
Right.
weeks later, it came through that funnel of thinking and like processing. And then I'd be like, oh, I got the lesson from 4 weeks ago. And I'd have those like aha moments. And I'm like, oh, that's what you were talking about 4 weeks ago. So then I learned through
Yeah.
this, like as a learner, one of the things that you can do is ask for breaks and then like jot down notes. So they were like, if you're not a note taker, become a note taker because it'll help your brain process. Write down key things that you want to talk about with people. But then it brought up a point is like, you're not good in arguments because of the fact that you have to process what's being told to you. So ask someone, if you're overwhelmed,
Mm,
ask them to write you and then let you write in response versus like on the spot thinking.
mm.
And I'm like, oh, but eventually, because I was able to work through some of that, I've gotten better at being like, no, like, you're not going to talk to me like that. Like, you're not going to yell and scream. We're going to take a moment and step back. Or, like, hey, let
Mhm,
me process that and let me get that back. Let me get back to you later because I want to think on some ideas that I
mhm.
have first before just saying something and then overcommitting to things. So I love that
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
100%. I'm like, that's why I like them so much, is because it did help me understand myself. So thank you for saying that.
yeah,
I love that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally get that. I was the same way in college.
Yeah. I'm
Like,
like,
I
oh,
don't do well with this lecture, like,
no, nobody
no.
does. And
But
just for
I
people
was gonna say
listening.
that's the thing. Like when I became a teacher, like in college and just stuff like that, like we read articles and did studies on how like being talked at and then taking a quiz is not the way to learn and not how people learn.
Yep.
And we're still doing it anyway.
Yep.
And they were wondering why people are dropping out.
Well, there is and I'm gonna link the article later, but there are several different researchers that have found that the brain can only handle a lecture for about 20 minutes before it taps out. 20 minutes. And that's like
That's probably a healthy brain.
a healthy brain. Yeah, someone who like 20 minutes. And that's like,
So not someone like us.
so if you have a learning
That would
disability,
be shorter, I would guess.
it's 7 minutes. If you have, it's probably like 7 to 10. I would say less than that, maybe 4 to 5. But that's why some teachers, the teachers that are good, that you have been like, oh, I connected to them, I learned so much. You'll notice that they break up things into like 7-minute increments, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit. What do you guys think about that? And it's more interactive. And then the other things too is like, if you're passing around notes, you learn like in a communication class, they're like, don't pass something out while you're talking about something important. Do that before, or say, okay, I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to pass this out to you guys, and then start back up talking because you're distracting the brain too
Mhm.
much. And yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And we still teach that way because it's easy,
yeah,
but it's no one thrives
it
in
is.
an environment. It doesn't, nobody
Yeah,
does.
yeah. I always tell my husband, I'm like, my best classes were my education classes because those professors knew how to teach. It was my like general ed one. My only C in my whole degree was like history
Hmm.
because he just talked at us, like all 200 of us. He just talked at us. That was it.
And it's
But
like two
my
hours.
education professors, yes, yes.
And it's always
That was
okay. I love history. I have a few history teacher friends, so I love you guys. But there is a lot of history teachers in college who are very monotone in their speaking, and they speak really quiet and slow. And in a lecture hall of 200
yeah.
people, that does not work. Like, get a microphone, be
Mhm.
dynamic, play it out, do I don't know,
Mhm.
do drama skits,
Yeah.
make it interesting. But I think I learned
Mhm.
more in an online 8-week class for history than I did in a 16-week in-person history class, because it was
Oh
definitely
yeah.
less interactive. I had more videos and stuff, so my brain was like breaking that stuff into little things. But yeah, no, we don't learn that way. We're some, and that there's learning styles too, where it's like tactile learning, you have to do it yourself, hearing,
Mhm.
seeing, speaking it, which is like, if you don't know that
Mhm.
going into college, and I learned that in college, like, oh, you are a visual, audio, and a tactile learner. You have to see it, hear it, and do it. Oh, that's why you're not doing so great. So when I realized that that's what
Mhm.
I needed, I started getting A's, and I didn't get A's. Like, I usually got D's and C's, and like, that was a mess. But then getting A's, I
Mhm.
was like, oh, and it was when I learned who I was internally and how I processed, that I was able to start
Mhm.
using that to say, okay, how do I gain from knowing this knowledge now? What can I implement?
Mhm.
And yeah, it takes
Yeah.
time and effort and energy, but it is a benefit to like doing these personality tests and like learning styles, and be like, okay, what do I need to implement to help me be better? not just knowing the information, be like, well, that's just who I am. Like, no,
Mhm.
we got to use this for good. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
I'm going to link some of this stuff because this is good. This is good information. And I feel like we don't talk about this enough. Okay. So if someone wanted to start doing what you do, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think the number one piece of advice I would give them might just be this reminder that you don't owe anyone your story. Because I feel like a lot of what I do is share my story in different ways. Like how does it connect to being a teacher? How does it connect to being a mom? How does it connect to, just different things. And I think it's important to remind myself, and if somebody wants to go about sharing their story, that it's your story and you're allowed to share what you want to share.
Yes.
Um, and I think it's also important to um, take care of yourself first, because I think in sharing my story, and then I work for a nonprofit that recruits for kids in foster care. So
Mhm.
I watch videos of kids who are in foster care today pretty much regularly, because I recruit for them on social media. So it can be really triggering. My job can be triggering. Sharing my story different ways can be triggering. So I think it's really important to take care of yourself. And I've been doing that by going to therapy. I meet with my psychiatrist once a month, and I'm on medication as well. So just putting those things in place so that I can do those things is
Ah,
really important. Um, and also, I think it's important to remember that the way that you share your story, whether it be through your day job or social media or whatever, doesn't have to look the same way that I do. And I think a lot of people come to me, they're like, "Oh, I want to do what you do. Like I want to share my story in the big ways that you have, but I don't feel like I'm ready." And I'm like, then you're not.
yeah.
Like, then don't, like from the outside, like you may see this like great thing that I'm doing, and I really am so like grateful and in awe daily of the difference that it is making. But I do have to step back at times and be like, okay, you know, here's a picture of my family. Like, like I'm still a person. Um,
Mm.
you know, and it is so classic that if I do something like that on my social media, like I'll just have tons of people unfollow me. And I'm like, okay, like that's good to know. Like, I wish you well. Because it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. Like, you have to remember that individuals who've experienced foster care are more than their story. And
Mhm.
yes, like I can talk about foster care probably all day, but I can also talk about being a teacher and education and like psychology stuff and being a dog mom and being like mom to my son and being a wife and what is it like being a pastor's kid or organizing or cleaning. Like I have lots of things I could talk about. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily talk about those all the time, but I think it's really easy if you're going to choose to share your story, whatever it is, for people to put you, like you said, in that box and be like, no, this is what you do. Whereas, like you said, you say to people, like, I'm not going to stay in my lane, like,
I want
you
to get a
know.
shirt that says I don't have a lane. And I talked to somebody about this week where I said, it's really interesting that a lot of people are like, stay in your lane, Denisha. Like I've been told that a lot of times. Like, stay in your lane, don't ask people to invite you. Like just stay in the foster care side. And I'm like, here's the deal with foster care. It's like it's so broad because it's not just the bad things where it's like foster care can hit human trafficking, homelessness, drug abuse. Foster care kids can also be put in prison and jail, and these are the population that we deal with on a daily basis, and we are trying to love on. But foster care are not just foster care, and that is where we first put and say stay in your lane advocate into only foster care. And I'm like, hold on, like that happened to us, but we are not the foster care system. That's not our job. And you said you don't owe anyone your story or details of your story. And amen. Because that is a constant battle that I like, and I
Oh
shared
yeah.
I don't know if I've shared this online yet, but I'm just going to say it is like, I have literally been told in rooms of sharing just I don't go into detail of my story because I don't want to traumatize someone in the room who has gone through it. I'm further away from
Right.
trauma than they are. They're closer to their trauma. It might have just happened 2, 3 years ago. And I have been told, like, well, why don't you share the details? Why can't you tell me the level of your abuse? And I'm like, y'all know why people get in foster care, neglect, abuse, all the other reasons why. You can't tell
Mhm.
me you need to know the details of my specific story. And I asked the
Mhm.
question, I said, why do you want to know? And one adult said, I want to know because I want to know if I can trust you. But then a young adult said, I want to know I'm not alone. And I just said, you're not alone.
Mm.
That's all you need to know. Like, if I tell you the details
Right.
of my trauma, it makes you spiral. And I don't want that for you. I don't
Right.
want you to think of
Mhm.
that. But you're so right. Like, we don't even own, like, we don't even have to give that explanation of like, I don't want to talk about foster care today. Like, that's it. Like, that's it. Like, that's it. If
Right.
someone says that,
Right.
that's enough. And we should
Mhm.
not say like you need to share more than that. And that's kind of what's like
Yeah.
started the podcast is that so many people were like, well, I don't know where the foster care kids are. I don't know where the success stories are. I don't know where the positiveness is. It's just so heavy. And they were
Mhm.
following so many foster care accounts because they were like, it's just so heavy. The month of May is so heavy. And they're like, I'll follow them back in like June and July. And I was just like, so then why don't we create a positive area in the internet that
Mhm.
says, here's what we are, who we are. We are
Mhm.
everyday people. And like, we're just
Mhm.
here and we want to talk about more than just foster care. And I think that
Mhm.
is super important, but also like kind of like a duh. Like we want to hear
Right.
the
Right.
undertones going up and being all cool and stuff. And so many people I've asked, they keep coming back to like, I don't have anything to offer. And I'm like, oh, you do. You so do. Like,
Mhm.
I want to know more
Mhm.
about you being a mom than your foster care story.
Mhm.
Like, that's a huge win for us
Right.
to be moms and to be like
Right.
raising our children. Like, holy crap. But also being like a
Yeah.
business owner, that's cool. Like that, not a lot of people do that in
Mhm.
general. But we
Yeah.
don't know any of
Yeah.
those things. So I like that you said like share your story your way. What when you're having that conversation with someone and they're like, well, I'm not ready yet. How do you guide them to like understand that it's okay to not want to share their story that way, or maybe to find their own way of sharing their story?
Um, I try to go back to the idea that the world would be very boring if we all did everything the same.
Mm,
And we need variety. We need things to be different. Um, that's why people look different, and that's good. That's like
mm,
we want we want that, right?
yeah.
Um, and so just that reminder that being the same is boring and people need different perspectives than mine. And I like to hear different perspectives that challenge mine and make me think.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, just that being yourself is, I don't know, it's special. And that's a gift.
I love that. I love that. Being yourself is special. And I think that that is where the loss of identity can happen for a lot of us. It's because we're like, we don't feel special. We just feel
Mm-hmm.
just there sometimes and sometimes feel like a burden. But I love that it's like you're still special. And again, you don't have to share your story if you don't want to. You can be
Hmm.
anything that you want to be. And then the other thing that you said is taking care of yourself first. Now,
Hmm.
someone once told me, this is the sad part, and someone's going to hear this and go, that's really hard. Um, Someone once told me, they said, Denisha, you need to take care of yourself. No one's going to do it for you. And they said, the hard reality is that if something were to happen to you today, your employer would put your job up first before your obituary. And I was like, that's dark. But it was like he was
Hmm.
trying to remind me, like I was doing all the things. And he just said, like, you are in charge of your mental health. No one will do it for you or say, like, hey, are you doing
Hmm.
okay? Like, I see that I overwhelmed your
Hmm.
schedule. No one will
Hmm.
do that for you. And so what are some of the, like you said, you do counseling, you do medication, you do self-care. What are some ways like and you can absolutely say I don't want to share that, but like what were some things that you said, okay, this is time to get into counseling, into medication and self-care? What were some of those things that like
Yeah,
not, maybe not the things, but like what were some of the alerts that you're like, I got to do something different?
right. Um, I think a big one for me, it was like disassociation. I just really had a hard time like being present. I felt like I was outside my body and I was just watching my life happen
Mm,
from the outside, which is a really, I believe it's a very common symptom of PTSD, um, because you're just like life doesn't seem real. And that was one that I had. I also had um, pretty severe depression where I just didn't want to do anything, which is like so not me.
mm,
Like I'm not like that at all.
yeah.
Um, but I think it can be really challenging um, for people to see the signs, especially if they have experienced extreme abuse or trauma, because it's hard to know, like, who am I in health?
Mm,
Like, and it's possible that maybe you haven't had a time period where you're in health. So I
yeah.
would say with that, like, seek professional help because, they'll be able to ask the right questions and, um, you know, help ground you. I know that was a really big struggle for
Yeah.
me. I mean, like my family's wonderful. I love my family, and it's not that they did anything wrong. It's just it's just something that happens.
Yeah.
Um, so
It's
yeah,
100%
but
normal. And that's something I don't
yeah,
feel. And it's kind of hard sometimes to be like, yeah, I'm on medication. Like I've been on medication in different settings because it was too much and my body wasn't regulating like it would this is the hard part. Like I once I went to a counselor, he's like, you might want to consider some anxiety medication because your body can't tell the difference between being excited and being high anxious. And so I would be sitting there and all of a sudden go into
yeah,
a panic attack because I was happy. And like you said, I couldn't regulate like what is good health and what wasn't. And that's kind of hard. And being with a counselor, they can help you and say, like, okay, that's not healthy. It's not healthy for you to
mm,
dismiss and say, I got 4 hours of sleep, but it's fine. Like, why are you not sleeping? Well, I'm thinking all the time. Okay, now you're
right,
anxious and you're not being able to like your body, it's not your mind, it's your body being like, oh, I'm happy, panic attack. Like, okay, I'm sad, panic attack.
right,
My body was not
right.
controlling itself. And I think we don't like to talk about mental health that way sometimes. And something he said to me is like, if it's a period of time you're on medication, it's a period of time. If this is something you need long term, all you're doing is taking care of yourself. And when he said that,
Hmm.
it finally kind of I sat back and I was like, he's right. It's the same as working out and eating healthy. Like, I'm not going to sit here and deny my body what it needs for health just because I'm afraid that someone's going
Hmm.
to look at me and be like, oh, yeah, no wonder you're on medication. Like, no, medication's
Hmm.
such a good thing for us when we need it. And if
Hmm.
it's long term, it needs to happen. And it's a good thing
Yeah.
to recognize that. And I don't like the stigma around medication and mental health because usually it's like, oh, you're crazy. It's like, no, because foster care is a whole
Hmm.
different like ball game when it comes to counseling, that it's often
Hmm. Yeah.
no. So if someone was wanting to look at going to counseling, what are some questions that they can ask, like if it right now is a good time to go to counseling?
Um, I mean, I think everyone should be in counseling. Um,
It's true.
so I feel like that's usually what I say. Like now the frequency and maybe the intensity may be different for different people.
Mhm.
Um, like I'm actually in a period now where I'm able to go longer periods with seeing my therapist. So that's been nice because I was like once a week and that's so expensive. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I think everyone should be in counseling just because life is hard.
Mhm.
Um, and I think if you're the spouse of someone who's experienced extreme trauma, you should be in counseling. Um, yeah, I mean, I think just everyone. That's usually what I say.
Uh,
Um, I say it to everyone I meet with for consulting. Because I'm
yeah.
very clear, like I'm not a therapist, but you should probably see one.
So well, I want to hear your kind of like your definition of like why counseling, why it, not just like everyone should be in, but what's the benefit of counseling?
I think the benefit of counseling is having I would hope, safe and educated voice able to ask the right questions and help you peel back the layers of whatever it is so that you can better understand yourself and so you can be in a healthier place. Um, I think, I mean, like I said, like life is hard, and I think all of us have different traumas that impact who we are and how we do different things.
Mhm.
Um, and I think counseling can really help you understand, like, oh, like have this irrational fear and this is why. So these are your counselor can help you through the steps of, you know, not getting over that fear, but working through that fear. Um, or, I have this, I get angry really easily. Well, your counselor can ask questions and help you realize that this happened to you and maybe that's why. Just like realizing your triggers.
Hmm. I think too, one of the counselor I had last year, I mean, like I need to like sometimes I'm like, oh, I should go say hi. Like I should have an appointment because that was hard to deal with emotionally. But like one of the things he told me was it's not always about digging back into your past. Sometimes it's just about helping you understand how to better respond to something today. So, like, I literally
Yeah,
was seeing him
that's
not
true.
because of my past, but because of, like, how I was responding in work. And I was like, "I'm having, like, these emotions, and, like, I feel it throughout my whole body." And he's like, "Your body is on fight or flight right now. So, like, let's work on how to get your body out of that so that way you can
Mhm.
make a rational choice versus where you feel right now you're
Yeah.
making emotional decision." And, he was like, "You're
Mhm.
not crazy for feeling this, this is how your body responds. And it's okay
Mhm.
to sit in that and not always think like, oh, in order to go to counseling, I have to go back to my past." And that's not,
Right.
and that I
Right.
think that's what we do think when we
Yeah.
start counseling is like, oh, I'm gonna have to dig into my past to see how this trigger is triggering today. And it's like
Right.
it's not
Right.
about the past. Sometimes it's just about how maybe
Mhm.
we're pushing some stuff off now, or maybe we're just like we need someone to come in and ask those questions from a
Right.
educated standpoint to know how to walk us through. And not everyone that we
Mhm.
talk to, even if they're great listeners and advice givers, they're not equipped to walk us through those things. And that's okay to
Right.
recognize that we don't always need counseling because
Mhm.
of our past. Sometimes it's just because of what we're currently going.
Right.
So
Right.
I love that
Yeah.
you said that because
Exactly.
that's 100% like, oh, yeah, true. I like that. All right. Is there anything
Mhm.
else you'd like to share? This was so good.
Um, mm, I think maybe just closing, like taking care of myself. Like I think I've had this very difficult balance of my dad was a pastor. Um, and in the community that I grew up, if I had said I'm going to take care of myself and do this and this, like it probably would have been labeled as selfish.
Mm,
And so I know that maybe other people may be feeling that, like, I come from this community or this community, and we were told that's selfish, and I know that's a big thing for a lot of people. And I think that's been a hurdle for me for sure. Um, but just learning that it's okay to do that. But also like the motivation of like I want to be the best mom that I can be for my son. And I can't do that if I don't take care of myself. Um, and so just keeping that in mind as well. And the fact that I want to like model for my son, like what does it mean to take care of yourself?
mm,
Um, and I think especially for him as a little boy, because men definitely have the stigma of like, we don't feel things. We don't, you know, things like that. So I really want to model that for him so that he can express his feelings,
right.
cry, like do the things he needs to do. Um, and he's not limited by the fact that I mean,
Mm. I like that. Self-care is not selfish. And I 100%, I have heard that for like, especially in like mom groups too, where they're just like, so one of them said, a shower is not self-care. It's not like that is not labeled your self-care. That is taking care of yourself and your daily needs. Self-care is more than that, but you don't have to spend all this money for self-care. Like it literally could be something like, you know what?
Mhm.
I'm taking today off. I'm taking a mental health day. And that's hard
Right.
when you have
Right.
kids to do that, but like you could say no to that event or like I know someone so they said they woke up one day and they had an event and they were sick and she's like I could push through and she's just like that's not going to help me. So she canceled and she didn't
Right.
want to, but she canceled the event. And she's just like, I woke up sick and I need to step back for a second. And they were just so gracious to her. And they were just like, don't worry about it. But other people may not be. They might just be like, you just push
Right.
through and then rest tomorrow. And it's like, no, self care is not selfish.
No.
It's necessary for us to be able to be all we can be. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, like, there's no one who can do that for us. So I love that you brought that up because I think 100% I've heard that my entire life. Like, oh, you're taking care of
Yeah.
yourself. You're looking out for number one. Like, oh, you're so selfish. And like, that's not, that's not Christ-like or like, that's not, we hear that a lot in the church. It's not Christ-like to be
Mhm.
focused on you. And it's like, there's a difference between selfish, where it's always me, always all the time, and self-care. So I want to challenge people to look up those two definitions because I think definitions matter. Selfish and self-care are
Mhm.
two different definitions, and self-care is not selfish. So I love that you brought
Mhm.
that up. Anything else you
Yeah.
want?
And can we also can we
Yes.
also remember that after Jesus spoke to places, he took a nap? Like
That point, and he cried.
like
The
and he
shortest
cried.
verse of the Bible is that Jesus wept, obviously because of Lazarus dying, but he still cried, which means he mourned when bad things happen. Like, but I
Right. And he
yes,
drank wine. So
he turned water into wine. I can't do that, but I can drink wine. But and I think again that's something that a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, why did you say that? And it's just like again in moderation. Like if you look at that with food the same way,
right.
I have a hard time with food. I struggle with
Absolutely.
that's my like my emotion. That's where I would go
Yeah.
when my emotions are all over is like, I'm gonna go eat again and I'm not
Mhm.
hungry. But it's
Yeah.
self-care of realizing in that moment of like, I'm having an emotion. And if I'm running toward an addiction or something, I need to go, ooh, okay, I need to talk to some people. Like I need to talk to my husband and just be like, I'm
Mhm.
feeling emotional. I need I need to get help. Like I need to take like a bath. I need to go on a walk. I
Yeah.
need go to even just walking at the store. Sometimes, I mean, that's great to just go to the store and just like walk around for a minute. But I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
had to recognize that those emotions sometimes bring out something that I'm like, I need to go do this. And it's like, is that a good release? Or is that something that I'm using as like an addiction to cover what I'm feeling up and not wanting to take
Right.
emotion? But yeah, he
Right.
wine.
Right.
And that's not bad. Wine is not bad. It's how we abuse it that is the bad thing. But
Right.
and
Exactly. I mean, it's just like social media or
oh, yes. Because we can
stuff like
literally cover
that.
our emotions up with social media. 100%. Like, I know people who get super emotional, they shut down and then they grab their phone and they're just like texting and calling people and like that's how they express their emotion and their hurt. And it's one of those things that we could literally just take out wine and put anything in there and say, is this something that you're running toward? And is that your way of like, how do we not run toward that as a bad thing and run like maybe just step away
Right.
from it and say, okay, this is how I'm going to deal with this self-care is not running toward that
Right.
thing. But that, yeah,
Right.
social media is, I think, a lot of our addictions.
Yep.
Social media is rough. Social media is hard,
It is
but
rough.
I love it. I love
It
that.
is rough.
Self-care is not selfish. I'm like, we need to get a shirt that says that. Self-care is not selfish.
Yes.
'Cause that honestly, I'd wear that like
Yeah.
7 days a week. I'm gonna get different colors.
Yeah. Same.
I love that. All right.
Same. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. I loved this conversation and I
Yeah.
think I got a lot of good information from it and learned a lot because I think it's just I don't think when we think success, we think what's healthy for you. I think we just think money and cars and things and or
Right.
titles, but we don't think like self-care
Right.
health. We just automatically assume like, oh, you're
Right.
successful because you have a lot of followers, or you're successful because you have this speaking gig
Right.
to, and it's like, if you're going home and like emotionally not doing well after something like that, it might you
Right.
it's time to reconsider how we're taking care of our mental health. So I really love that
Right.
you did that. So all right, I'm gonna go ahead and
Mhm.
stop recording.
We want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Foster Greatness. We equip foster youth by connecting communities and empowering individuals on their journey. We provide workforce development, master classes, travel abroad experiences, and individual and community support for foster communities. If you're interested in learning more, please visit fostergreatness.co. Thanks for joining us.